Let's see. Okay, I think we're live. I'm going to try.
I'm seeing live. So,
alrighty. Hello everybody. This is coming through StreamYard for the first time. So if I don't know what I'm doing, it's not my fault, not Eric's. Sorry. And this is to introduce. Yeah, it's my pleasure, really. I mean, I think I got into my bolt a lot through your channel, so I owe you a debt of gratitude for that. Way back in 2017. But this is Eric Way of News Coulomb. Channel's linked down below in the description. And yeah, first time we've touched base as actual live streamers or on the channel. So
yeah, and
welcome.
I mean, who knows? Maybe, maybe future precedent there. So
yeah, this seems pretty cool. I didn't know there was this much stuff in this. So good evening, Brian. Brian Ribby is a great channel over in Minnesota.
Oh, nice.
And Ribby Drives Electric. I had the pleasure of having dinner with he and his wife and family this earlier July 4th, I think it was. Yeah, July 4th. So we had a good road trip out there, and Brian is a really good voice from the Tesla side, but really appreciates non-Tesla EVs as well. Really good videos on adventures out there. So had a good time with him. And yeah, anyone who is here, just we get all your comments here. Drop your location over there in the live chat, and we'll try and kind of get into the topic here.
Yeah, maybe what kind of EV you're driving to, like Steve said, the region. And so, yeah, welcome, Brian. Because, yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned I kind of preceded you getting into the Bolt EV, Steve, but I think your experience is also valuable because I kind of get the whole, well, you live in California, so your experience doesn't apply. And it's like, well, yeah, but there are people on the East Coast and New York and Midwest. So it's nice to have people with different experiences. And as long as we can kind of all come from that point of they're being true and honest to their experiences. So we have to kind of defer to what people say, you know, what they experience in their region. But do we want to just kind of jump into the topic that brought us here today?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the last time I live streamed on this, and there's been a regular drumbeat of news, announcements, which are getting, to the point of, we're just waiting bingo card everybody off at this point. But it's essentially, the last time I did anything on it was what got you in touch with me, I think, because we realized there was a lot more to talk about on the, constant drumbeat of Ford, GM, Volvo, Rivian, Nissan yesterday, Mercedes. I'm probably missing all of them, but there's a bunch of people essentially who are going to move to having a native NACS port in 2025. Next year will be the year of the adapter, by the sound of it. From spring onwards, it sounds like Ford. Everybody's going to have this, adapter, which we all pretty much figured was available anyway. Could be made, but it was always the kind of the way we hoped to get into the walled garden at some point of the Tesla supercharger network. But obviously, that has set a lot of questions around. How does this happen? How quickly will it happen? Who else is going to join? There's been a lot of the commentary I've seen at least has mostly been, hooray, everything is glorious, charging's fixed, etc., etc. And I don't think that's quite the experience that I've had on the ground with Magic Dock.
With Magic Dock specifically, right?
For me, and then I've certainly seen your videos, and maybe you can kind of jump into some of the. Well, I think you had a good take on where the breakdown in communication and some of this story was.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good starting point here, because I want to say, like, the big breakdown, I think, is people are conflating two very different issues, and it's almost like one is overtaking the other. And that first is some automakers are negotiating for access to the superchargers, and some are not. And that is an issue in and of itself. So Ford started that ball rolling, then GM jumped in, then Rivian, then Mercedes, and now we have news that Nissan is as well. And that is confusing this issue, because I think the other aspect is we're looking at a new CCS standard. And I need to emphasize that it is not a new Tesla standard. It's not a Tesla standard at all, in fact. In fact, it is a new CCS standard that's incorporating J1772 and CCS protocols into the Tesla plug. So essentially, it's taking, outside of CHAdeMO, every plug that we know in North America is basically all being consolidated under a single standard. Some facet of that plug or standard is being applied. And so the SAE is currently putting all of those together, right, to form this new plug standard. And so that's why I say it's a very different issue than accessing the superchargers, because that's a deal that automakers are cutting on the side. And in fact, GM's press release notes that they are doubling down on their focus on charging infrastructure for their EV owners. And so what does that mean? Their number one partner is still EVgo. They're not dropping that partnership. EVgo is still building out hundreds and hundreds of those 350 kilowatt sites. The Flying J partnership is still going forward. But in addition to that, GM brokered a deal with Tesla to gain access to those 12,000 CCS compatible superchargers in North America. And that's where I say this breakdown is happening, is there are 20,000 plus CCS, or there are 20,000 plus supercharger stalls throughout North America. 8,000 of them are the Tesla standard only. Those ones, nobody's going to get access to. They won't be Magic Dock. We've talked about this before, I think, Steve. Maybe they'll get ripped out of the ground. Maybe they'll get converted to version 4 superchargers. But in the meantime, those 8,000 stalls are essentially Tesla only. It's those 12,000 stalls that Ford, GM, Rivian, Mercedes, Nissan are all working with Tesla to gain access to. So that's that issue. And Hyundai is balking, Lucid is balking, right? And why? They're purely 800 volt architecture EV companies moving forward. And the superchargers, the V3 superchargers, speaking to your experience, Steve, they just don't work well for eGMP cars. They don't work well for Lucid. They work half well for the GMC Hummer EV, right? Because it can toggle full on between 400 volt and 800 volt. But that's a separate issue, right? And everybody's looking at this as a huge Tesla win. And I want to be clear about this, Steve, too, because I know some people would assume that I would be negative about this. I think this is a net benefit. And the more, initially I was a little bit worried, but the more I listened to Jim Farley, the more I listened to Mary Barra, RJ Scaringe, these different CEOs from the different companies talking about this is a net benefit for everyone. Now, like you in the Hyundai Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, Kia EV6, all of those 800 volt car owners, this is going to be limited benefit for you for the next 2 to 3 years. Not until Hyundai adopts the new SAE plug standard with this new Tesla plug, and companies like EVgo, Electrify America, ChargePoint start deploying 800 volt chargers with this new standard. Same with the V4 superchargers. So
let me see if I can bring this up as you talk. Keep on talking. Let me see if
So that's I think how we want to make sure that we're looking at this. We're framing these as two very, very different issues, right? And I think part of what's confusing it is the name. I think this NACS name, frankly, needs to go. So initially, I thought it could at least be construed as a potentially racist microaggression, right? Because right now it's making people think that, CCS1 isn't deployed in Asia. It is. It's deployed in parts of Asia. CCS1 isn't deployed in South America. It is. It's deployed in parts of South America. So to say this is the North American standard is misleading, right? Because I think what's happening is Tesla wants to tie it to their supercharger network. And that's where it gets to be. Even if you say, it wasn't an unintentional, racist microaggression, it still isn't clearly communicating what the standard actually is. The standard is CCS being ported over to this new plug format, but it is 100% interoperable with CCS. So the video you're showing right now, you're plugging in your Hyundai Ioniq 5 into a V3 supercharger. You can do that because V3 is bilingual. And I think we have the European Union to thank for that, frankly. Like, I think they forced Tesla's hand. Tesla, in order to get public funding in Europe, needed to adopt CCS. They had no choice in the matter. And so from that point forward, their chargers were all bilingual. They all spoke that CAN bus original, still proprietary Tesla supercharger lingo, but then they also had to speak the CCS lingo. So that makes it 100% interoperable with all CCS vehicles. Literally all you need is a dummy adapter. No, just a physical adapter, just like these this old J1772 to the Tesla plug adapters. This is AC only, so you'll see a lot of these around. They're starting to make them for CCS, right? CCS1, because all that's required is a physical adapter, unless that charging provider is creating some sort of a gateway to get in, and that's what Tesla is still doing. Right, we have to use the app to use that Magic Dock, and we have to kind of go through their system in order to interface with their chargers. But otherwise, they are 100% interoperable with CCS. So, you know, with this, I think moving forward, that NACS standard name, like I said, it just doesn't make sense given what it's trying to communicate. Because I think, frankly, I think what Tesla is doing, the reason those automakers who are brokering a deal with them to access the superchargers, the reason Tesla is requiring their format plug in order for that deal to happen is because they want to tie that plug to their standard. But it's not really, it's just CCS. You know, and that's I think the thing that we all have to understand now that it's out of the gate, now that that format is clear and free and open for everybody to use, and they've already given basically within their documentation information stating that you can use DIN and ISO, the 15118 standard. The cat's out of the bag. Now whoever's running a CCS charger can literally just hook up that new plug standard to it, and any CCS compatible vehicle can use that charger. There shouldn't, I mean, obviously there's reliability issues within the CCS networks, interoperability issues within the CCS networks, but in theory, right, as long as the charger is working properly and the car is working properly and they're both configured to CCS standards, moving forward, all we have is a single plug format standard now. So like you said, this is going to be the next year or two is the year of the adapter. That's kind of true. Basically, every car built right now is going to need an adapter to use all of the plugs at this point. There's just, unless you retrofit and pull all of those old CCS1 sockets out, you're going to need an adapter. Because
so, I mean,
moving forward, it's one standard.
It's a good point, and you know, it's kind of, it really, to me, it's just the next phase of you know, Tesla's has to now step in, right? It's becoming, you know, with this limited pilot that we've had, especially over here. I know you've been to the site up in Northern California. Mm-hmm. But it's becoming now a public charge point operator. So we've got this a lot of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on through, you know, on the ground stuff that we've seen. I'll put the video back up super quick. But this was, you know, one of a couple of successful sessions. I think I've been to 5 sites now of the Magic Dock, and we've had about a 40% success rate. So this was about as good as it got. I think we maybe got up to 46 kilowatts. And obviously this is part of the 800 volt limitation, although I think in theory we're supposed to be able to get close to 100.
Yeah.
But in any case, this is as good as we've had with Magic Dock. The location was Brewster, New York. It's nothing really around it. There's not an equivalent site that I could have used. So that's about as good as we've had on Magic Dock. But we're getting a lot of around, look at the PlugShare locations and some of the Magic Dock places. And, some of the commentary has been that this is a panacea. It's kind of going to solve everything. Thank goodness Tesla's involved. And obviously, there's some elements of that with the location for a start. Some of these are in locations that there simply aren't. As I say, Brewster is not many other options that we could have gone to down there. So that's a good location to have if it was a full power site that we could use at triple-digit fast charging. This is one of the ones that has failed us a few times over up in Fredonia. Constant kind of errors out. You can see there, constant errors coming up. It just wouldn't be able to get it to start. And this was after a successful session further across in Batavia, New York. So I've got this whole kind of, and again, this is something that has happened over several months here. It's a pilot, so this is the whole point of this shaking out. But there's a video I'd love to make if I thought it was possible of a Tesla only road trip, right? Me using the Magic Dock across. It would be a long and arduous journey, but it's possible. It's something we can do now on that route of limited Magic Docks. But it's a lot of the complaints against it and the things that I've been seeing across PlugShare have been very reminiscent of the arguments made against the public charge point operators. So low power, short cables, suboptimal layout. No pull through. App had the reset a few times. Had to try 2 or 3 posts. And in the public space, for an Electrify America or an EV Go, this is cause for utter destruction. This is the end of the world. They can't be used for anything to road trip, as I can't road trip on CCS apparently, and I somehow just did 3,000 miles. So I'm confused as to how that happened, but here I am alive to tell the tale. Video
must have been a tow truck.
It was pretty awful. Yeah, I must have got gas somewhere along the way. So I think that the takeaway there, neither of these sessions were successful. The one in Brewster was good and helped me on my way. So fair. It's a nice option to have that one. But it kind of starts to speak to this story of some of the comments here. Just reliability. So slapping a new plug on something with bad hardware or software doesn't fix it. Now, we don't say that Tesla has bad software, but there's clearly some limitations that we've already got here, and I'm not seeing the benefit of it as yet. Mark says doesn't think it'll be as reliable. That's what we're seeing on PlugShare. A lot of these Magic Dock sites have the ratings starting to fall, or complaints, or just all of these things that are so common. They register in my head because I've heard them all about Electrify America, EV Go, a lot of the mainstream charge point operators that just are under the microscope all the time. And this is what comes of having 10, 20, 30 different automakers use your network, not necessarily have the validation in place, have to have a live experiment running across New York where people can come and test it out for you. This is just the reality of being a public operator, I think.
Well, and I think so. There's one thing though that I would say that we would want to address in this realm of reliability, right? Well, actually, scratch that. There's a bunch of things. I hope you have at least some commenters from Europe, because in particular, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, there are issues in Europe as well, and that's a CCS V3 supercharger, right? And so, to your point, it looks like Hyundai and probably Kia anticipated in Europe, and that's why they're charging at 100 kilowatt. Where if I hazard a guess, it's that the EGMP cars in the United States at the time that they were developed, they knew that the only 500 volt public chargers were 50 kilowatt. So why program it to charge faster than that? It's pointless to do so. Tesla, kind of threw them for a loop when they released the Magic Dock, because now all of a sudden you have a 500 amp, 480 or 500 volt. And actually, sorry, the Magic Dock is restricted to 350 amps. So it's not the true CCS 500 amp plug, but but still, that's significantly more than 50 kilowatts of power. So I think Hyundai set up their power module to process 50 kilowatts of power off of 400 volt systems. That was their mindset, and at least in North America. But you go to Europe, it should be closer to 100, and that maybe is the limitation for their internals. It seems to make sense to me. But then there's still issues with compatibility and interoperability. So even though that's pure CCS, right? Same CCS plug, everything else, Hyundai Ioniq owners are still having issues on the superchargers in Europe. So there's definitely something to me that's going on beyond that, and that's speaking to your point about the reliability issues. But one thing I don't think gets talked about enough with the public chargers versus the superchargers are there's a really huge potential or opportunity, if you want to be someone who's spreading misinformation, to self-sabotage on public chargers, because there's credit card payment issues, because there's app issues, because the way you're interfacing with the chargers is very different than the way you interface with them with a Tesla. You don't set up the payment app with a Tesla. You don't set up any of that other than entering your payment information. So when you plug your car in, if you're driving a Model 3, Model S, whatever, you plug your car in at a supercharger, it works. There's no point for you to screw it up as the driver. As no, not in the setup, not in the app. Magic Dock is different. There's an app. It took me an additional 2 minutes to get that charger started because I had to validate my payment in the app. Even though I thought I had already validated it, the app didn't take it. So then I had to re-enter it again. Like you said, these are issues that people are complaining about with the public chargers, but are now being applied to the superchargers. And so that user error, that is one thing that any fully integrated charging system is going to eliminate, the potential for user error. And that's based on what I've seen. I won't say it's a majority of the failures in the public charging infrastructure, but it is a large enough percentage that I don't think that we're getting an accurate representation of how reliable the public chargers actually are, at least in terms of true hardware interoperability. And that's the only way I can explain how I've charged hundreds, if not thousands of times now on various public chargers and had little to no issue, whereas people using the same exact chargers are running into issue after issue after issue, even when running the same car as me, in theory running the same payment app as me. Why am I not having issues, but they are? So there's some other breakdown happening that's not an interoperability issue. So I think having that automated integration, we're already seeing that with EVgo, right? The auto charge. We see it with Electrify America. Their auto charge enabled EVs are more reliable on their network than the ones that are using outside apps or whatnot. I would encourage everybody to watch this. Alex, the EV Buyer's Guide, he just posted a video about this, and his focus was kind of on that interoperability and concerns about the reliability. But yeah, when Electrify America basically claimed that Ford was at fault for their initial reliability. And I know that there was an aspect of that that's true, because Ford set up their Ford Pass and you had to toggle between in your app and when you're setting up your payment. If you're on the wrong payment, then it's going to try to make you pay as a non-member. And so there were some integration issues with the app, but not necessarily interoperability issues as far as CCS as a standard is concerned. So I think a lot of this concern about how reliable are these chargers going to be moving forward, I think it's overblown a little bit. As long as we get to the point where the payment readers are reliable, the apps are reliable, and the users are experienced enough with the format and the payment options that they're not running into issues, I think we're going to see a skyrocketing improvement in reliability across all the networks.
I mean, I've definitely seen that with EVgo on this last trip. We defaulted to them in a couple of places. You know, once you get into the cities, it starts to get a bit janky with all the hardware, and it's not as easy to get a charge because you have locals and rideshare and everything else vying for the limited 3 or 4 stalls. EVgo came in clutch at least 2, probably 3 times with the new hardware, and not across both of them, Delta and Signet, 350 kilowatt stations, just auto charge within maybe 20 seconds. Straight off to the races. The charge curve was perfect, done in 20 minutes before we could get back from the bathroom. This is quick stuff and exactly what we see in folks like Brian's videos where he's plugging in the Model Y. Him and his family are taking longer than the car to charge. And again, this is like, I mean, that's not the exact comparable example because it's still it's EVgo, it's a third-party network, but a lot of those advantages, as you kind of pointed out, that we see Tesla owners loving because of course you would love plugging in everything happening in the background. You can go and do your business. It's all that vertical integration, and it's not an exact comparison, but if VW, EA was only charging Volkswagen ID4s and an Audi e-tron, you've only got to validate 3 or 4 models, do a heavy dose of testing, and you're also, that's not even the same thing because they're not making the chargers, they're not making the software, but it's closer. You'd have to assume that the reliability and the general sentiment towards any network that was then baked into the vehicles and the software as well would have much more, success and would have less of these dramatic, blowouts. And again, it's a lot of these things. I think it's also they're overblown. We definitely ran into, just as anecdotal observation, heading west once we left Ohio, started to hit Indiana, Illinois, all the way over to Minnesota. D-rated stations were much more common. Now we did find a few more stalls, started to get up to 6-8, which is a nice kind of number that's comparable to something like a supercharger. But it was much more common then to hit 90, 80 kilowatts. And again, you just kind of you go to the store, you do your stuff. That never has been a deal breaker for me. If I'm getting up anywhere close to 3 figures, I'm pretty happy. But again, these are different levels of problem, and we're going to see all of these things coming back again. These will be things that we'll have with supercharger access, and not just for me, forget me not being able to necessarily access it and get full whack. It's F-150 Lightning owners not being able to get close to the station or blocking 3 stalls, or there's a bunch of stuff on the ground that needs to get figured out that seems to get kind of jettisoned along the hyperbolic excitement of we can get to superchargers.
Well, yeah, so you're actually making me think of 3 different issues, because I know that I had an exchange, I think, with some of your viewers on your channel before too about payment readers, and we're seeing leaked images now, right? V3 or V4 superchargers might actually have an interface and a payment reader,
and they're going to have to in California, right?
California, but only if they're a public network. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be on Tesla. So if they want to get access to those CEC, the California Energy Commission grant funds, things like that, they're going to need to have a credit card reader access. They're going to need to be able to display how much power is actually being dispensed. So Weights and Measures can come in and certify that they're not, they're not shaving some electrons off the top. But that's the big issue that I see too, is I hear all of these comments about payment readers being so unreliable, where in my experience, I've never had, not once, a failed payment reader that wasn't at an EA site. So it is literally just Electrify America. Like I remember when EVgo started deploying credit card readers at their chargers, and I look and I see that they're NACS credit readers, and I'm like, oh no, not again, right? Because the NACS, I was blaming NACS, the NAYAX for Electrify America's reliability issues, but then EVgo, slide my card in, it works right away. Like no issues, right? I had a friend, didn't have an EVgo account set up, pulled out her credit card, swiped it. I showed her how to pay, just put in your credit card, worked right away. Recargo, before they were absorbed by EVgo, never had a credit card payment reader. FreeWire, as long as their charger is working, their boost charger is working, I've never had a payment issue with credit card readers. So it's literally just Electrify America who's having some sort of an issue with their credit card readers. And early on, this was 5 years ago, I guess now, it's that long ago, Livermore, I was trying to use an Electrify America charger and the payment reader was down, but the charger was up. This was pre-app. I was told by the customer service that they had a different group of technicians who worked on the credit card readers. It's not the same ones who work on the chargers. So they can reboot the charger, but they have to have a different technician reboot the credit card reader. So that tells me that Electrify America, however they chose to set it up, they integrated their credit card readers poorly. So I would not look at credit card readers as being inherently, unreliable. And this is a point where, like I said, I think I have a point of contention with a lot of EV owners right now is moving forward. Future EV buyers are primarily going to charge and pay for charges using credit cards because they're not going to have an account. They're not going to be charging publicly frequently enough, right? These early adopters are people who are long distance drivers. It's the ones who make the most sense to buy an EV. I mean, like it or not, we have to consider ourselves upper middle class. If you can afford a brand new EV at this point, you are not working class in this country. I hate to say it that way, but that's the truth of the matter is EVs are still not affordable for just the average new car buyer or used car buyer. And so those are the individuals who moving forward, who are finally going to be able to start affording EVs. They can't afford to travel necessarily. They don't have the freedom of mobility, the freedom of time, the freedom of income to just go on a cross-country road trip. So they're going to charge every now and then away from home, and they're going to want to use a credit card. They're not going to want to maintain any sort of app with any or account with any specific charging providers, right? So I think we're going to see that sort of start to move away, and we're going to have reliable credit card readers. Electrify America is going to have to improve their credit card readers. But then there were a couple other things that you had mentioned, Steve, that I wanted to
let me just pause 1 sec here, Eric. I'm going to make sure I catch up on comments so that everybody is there. Payment readers are a big part of that, so this is a good point to do that. Leonard says payments are a big issue for many networks. Francis Energy is massively more reliable with an RFID compared to a credit card. Payment system.
I noticed Mike also mentioned the payment reader on Willis and Vacaville, but I actually have had issues in Vacaville on those chargers with auto charge and RFID as well. So I'm not 100% sure that's the credit card reader. I had to escalate to EVgo a couple of times because auto charge didn't work. When I tried RFID, it also didn't work. I had to wait for a charger to open up at the Electrify America to charge.
Gotcha. Okay. Gas pump simplicity. Yeah, we can go there in a sec. Plug-in charge with EVgo. I have auto charge. It's EVgo's version of it, which is their way of doing an end run around plug-in charge. I think it just uses the car's MAC address to validate. And I didn't know about the security at first. I know there are people who have security concerns, but it has worked so well that I guess my security has gone out the window, or any concerns I had. Patrick says, what I find frustrating is why CCS providers speaking up about why stations are offline. What's the issue? Why are they off so long? So radio silence. I don't know. Is that your kind of perspective? Is that how you see them? I know recently, I would say, the new CEO at Electrify America has been doing videos that kind of preempt. Now, some of these are PR exercises, but he did a road across the states and touched on them. And then he preempted the resumption of idle fees this week or coming in next month by, putting out a little bit of a social media post saying, this is a question I've got, this is what's happening. Now, I don't know that we're going to get down into the nuts and bolts of this is why this particular type of BTC power station didn't work on the 4th of July in this town. But, what do you think about how communicative the networks are, how communicative they should be?
I think they definitely need to be better. And I'll say this: it's just been frustrating how long it's taking to fix some of these chargers, right? And so I have a local Electrify America site where I would say two of the chargers have been down and out of commission more than 50% of the time in the last 3 to 4 months. And it's like, at what point in time are you coming to fix them? There's a couple of EVgo chargers over in Yuba City, for those of you who know that location over there by the Chipotle. They had their plug, the CCS one latches specifically broken off. So I'm concerned because that's targeted vandalism that I think people know wouldn't be reported to the charging providers, but there is plug share. So they got that report, and EVgo turned off the CCS plug. So it's basically a CHAdeMO only charging station right now. But it's been over a month and a half, almost 2 months, and these are just 50 kilowatt cables. They haven't replaced them yet. So I don't know what the priority is with it. But everything just seems to be taking way longer than it should for maintenance, for updates, for improvements. And then California, it's a particular pain point, because despite our governor's words, they've done zero to fast track public chargers in California, which is why it's 2 to 3 times the national average to bring a DC fast charger online in California, which you would think it should be the exact opposite, given where the primary EV market in the United States. So, but to that other point, Steve, about communication, yeah, I don't feel like it's. I mean, I've followed up on that EVgo charger and said, hey, when are you going to get these fixed? What's your ETA? Like, you're not even providing a timeline for when a technician is going to get out there to fix those chargers. So it is frustrating, and yeah, just communication all around is not where it needs to be, I think.
We ran across a few techs out in the field. Not everyone was working on the chargers actively, but we hit this one in Ohio. So Mark, you may know this station, up at Indian Meadow off the Ohio Turnpike. It's cool that he was using a Ford F-150 Lightning as well, so I enjoyed seeing that. But I've definitely noticed an uptick in them being out there, at least. So that has been positive. Whether or not that means the station is a quick turnaround time, I don't know. But we are definitely seeing more activity there in the field, I think, and that perhaps means they have access to the parts, they have access to the people that they need to get into the field. But I know these people are sometimes coming from, we'll see someone with Indiana plates up in Wisconsin, or, they're driving several 100-mile radiuses to service these stations. So there's probably an element of, again, that vertical integration that Tesla has. It's, had a decade now, and probably got good people working on this, time after time, and that there's a more simple kind of factor to the fact that they make it all. They've got all these pieces, they know how much they need, they know how much they're accelerating the network, and again, that doesn't necessarily translate though to communication. I mean, they can communicate through the car, I guess, and through the Tesla app, but there's something that's sort of frustrated me a little bit. I know what I'm going into when I go to these Magic Dock sites, but I've seen reports from people, saying they've turned up and, why isn't it working? Or I got this software issue, and, people on Twitter going back, well, it's a known issue. It doesn't work with the Ioniq 5 and eGMP cars, all the time. Like, known issue to who? And who's he got to call when he gets that problem? He goes to Twitter, which is probably a good place to contact Elon, perhaps, but it's not the best place to get practical, real world, on the ground example of, how to work the station, and, or someone to tell you, look, this is a problem, you'll need to find an alternative provider. But again, that communication, it's just another thing that Tesla is going to have to do better, simply is going to, or have to get the communication stream through the manufacturer that they're working with. You know, if it's not going to be Tesla as a charge point operator, it needs to be some other way, because you can't have people struggling at stations. We know this is a major complaint against some of the providers, and it's going to be the same for them, I think.
Yeah, well, and you had mentioned something too about Tesla with their vertical integration and having, so really, like, and this, I've called this out as a concern. Right now, there are only two charging providers that I feel like I feel confident in their ability to fix chargers quickly, and that's Tesla and ChargePoint, and that's because they both build in-house. Now, I guess Flow does as well. They're not really in my area, so it is, and FreeWire does as well. Though FreeWire has had some reliability issues, but those charging providers that build their components in house are the ones that have a tendency to be able to fix their equipment faster. Whereas with EVgo, they're working primarily with Delta at this point. Some Signet, some BTC Power, even some ABB still, but those are off-the-shelf components that they're buying from an outside provider. The cables, the Huber plus Sooner cables, the ones that people complain about so much with the public chargers, those are outsourced. You're shipping them from Europe, I think they are built near their headquarters, right? So in Europe, so you're shipping in components literally from another continent to support the upkeep and maintenance of these charging sites, and that's a huge risk, right? You'd like for a number of reasons, but turnaround time is another one. And I think too, maybe just touching on that subject one last time, is I think one other reason we could be seeing a slowdown in the upkeep and fixing of chargers is how quickly new chargers are being deployed. We saw this with Electrify America early on. They're just going, all out building new charging stations, and there was just literally not enough chargers and parts left over to fix the ones that they'd already put in the ground. And so EVgo is doing a very similar push right now. I think there are several hundred 350 kilowatt Ultium ready sites that are at some phase of getting their key turned and power turned on. You're talking about a massive build out of chargers, and maybe just not enough spare parts left over to go back and fix the chargers that have already been deployed. So
sure. No, I think that's again, there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes that I don't think we see. But the underlying kind of complaint will always be, why aren't they up? How long did it take to fix? And I think at some point we're going to have to get to, I don't know if the joint office that was created will get this, but we'll need standards, and standards being the wrong word, but metrics and KPIs that do speak to this, and industry wide, not just kind of pulled out of our hat, and we want to say
Are you referring to like the NEVI funding and the requirement for like the?
But I mean something across the board. I think. I mean, obviously NEVI sites will have to have that. That will be a requirement of the funding. But I think the office that was behind it, or that was created, just out of it. I forget the name now. Joint. I'll have to pull it up. There was something created. It needs that kind of North American body, I think, to be able to pull some kind of reporting, at least, even if it doesn't have teeth initially. We need some kind of national metric to be able to say, this is how every provider, anyone who wants to be a public provider, is performing. As regards uptime, turnaround to fix, maintenance. It would be helpful at least to have those figures start circulating every month, I think.
Yeah, even if it's just the United States for now. I know like the Energy Commission, places like that are logging some of that data. That's where we're getting a lot of those data for how many different plug types there are deployed, right? So, because I'll also say this too, like one concern, because I see this in EV media a lot, or mainstream media too, is this referral to JD Power and Associates charging surveys, right? And it's really hit or miss sometimes whether you get them. And I think one issue I could see possibly is we know that negative experiences are more likely to be reported by customers. But if a majority of the charging sessions are happening with something like superchargers, well, they're going to inherently have more check-ins, right? Whereas something like EVgo or Electrify America is going to have less, and those negative check-ins could have a disproportionate impact, right, on their JD Power associates. So I don't know how we're going to get that sort of accurate data, right? And I know Kyle at Out of Spec also called this out too, is there's a lot of times when the charger's down and there's nothing to report, right? There's no, and a lot of times I think that is due to vandalism, which is why I'm glad NAVI isn't using that to determine charger uptime. But we need to know that these charge point operators are getting accurate data, right? That their chargers are actually up and working. Mm-hmm. And so when they're getting these reports and they're sending that data out, we can have some sort of trust in it. Because right now, all of the data that I'm seeing coming out right now about reliability is very suspect to me, just in terms of what are the numbers, is there selection bias, who's doing the reporting. I mean, even that report that everybody keeps quoting about, oh, it was some ungodly number of chargers in the Bay Area that weren't working. And they came out and said, oh, yeah, in this survey, we also marked it as not able to work if we had to back our car into the stall in order to plug in. And it's like, you realize there are networks that literally require you to do that, right? So it's like
100% supercharger sites.
Yeah. So, but they weren't testing the superchargers; they were only testing the public chargers. Yeah. So, there's some suspect data that I feel like is sometimes being manipulated for whoever wants. You know, I even saw, I think it was that PBS special, and they didn't even allow you to leave a comment on their YouTube channel. So, you know, there was some shenanigans going on, but the guy was driving a Rivian, right? He got a Rivian for review, and he couldn't charge at an Electrify America station because it wasn't accepting his credit card. And he was tapping his credit card on the card reader when he has a chip card that needs to be inserted. He finally figured it out when he stopped like the next Electrify America later. He's like, oh, maybe I should insert my card. Yeah, maybe you should. So it's like,
sometimes it's the weak squishy bit that is the broken.
Yeah, between the ears, right? So
so we have, let me catch up on comments, then I'm going to kind of hand it back for anything that we haven't given you time to air yet. So Anabi says, what's the EA incentive to fix broken chargers when their court mandate is to install chargers, not maintain them? Money spent on maintenance is money not spent on installation. True. This is going to be a topic that comes up, probably a separate video really, but you know, their funding requirement runs out through 2027, I guess it is. So, you know, there's a fourth quarter or fourth period of investment here, and then it's going to be on to what's next, what comes next. Right. So they have, the incentive there is to not get penalized further still, I would guess, but it's hard to believe that they will have much more changing in the next few years here. I think they're still going to go and accelerate. But again, they have really, they've spent a lot of money when they realized these stations, older vendors, were not performing. There's one down the road from me being ripped out and, put back in with the brand new Signet equipment. So I don't know if you count that as an installation or maintenance, but to me, it's much more upgrade and maintenance than actually installing a new location. You're not going to get credit for that in your mandate. So it's I don't necessarily have much doubt about their willingness to do maintenance, but I do think that they are a new company who probably have some way to go to organize themselves effectively.
Yeah, well, and speaking to motivation, I typically assume that people will perform the best they can at a job. Just it's human nature to want to do a good job. And I think that's primarily how Electrify America has been operating so far. But there's no incentive, right, to go out of their way to go above and beyond. So just corporate reputation doesn't apply to them. Like Steve was saying, they're still on that 10-year funding cycle that's already mapped out for them. There's no incentive to be a profitable company. But I will say with this new CEO, you also got notice of the membership increase in price, Steve? So it's now,
I'm kind of insulated from some of that at the moment because I'm one of those awful free charging people. But I promise I do try and leave within half an hour.
Yeah, well, I was going to say I guess spoiler alert. I might end up canceling my Electrify America membership as a result of that, because I haven't seen a commensurate improvement in reliability or charger build out that would say, yeah, you're going to pay almost 50% more per month for a discounted rate that's not as discounted as it was before. Mm-hmm. Especially not when there's so many other better charging options available now than there were, 3 years ago. So, but I think to me that signals that they are getting ready to gear into this more profitability driven phase where they're going to be more incentivized to upkeep and fix their chargers, basically.
Well, I mean, competition alone, right? You can see it, coming. The PlugShare map is a very optimistic place right now. If you start to look at a lot of these routes, I've just made a habit of trying to look before I go to my next actual charger to see if there's a charger that's maybe just being built, So, hence my wife being dragged around various places to look at trenches and boxes of hardware. But it does happen, and sometimes we hit pay dirt and see a brand new site that's about to go live. But that's going to start rolling. I think this year is going to be difficult, but next year you're just going to start to see activation after activation. So the stuff that you're talking about, canceling that membership, which may be, not to give you California kind of fever, but you have the selection, you have the choice over there to make that kind of decision. Maybe people in the middle of the country and some areas where we are don't have that right now, but it's coming. That competition is going to force people to either be the best solution and charging option that people have, so they pay for it, or you're just not going to get the business, and that's going to be a part of this Tesla conversation as well, because if there's a supercharger down the road, it's expensive at the moment, but Tesla does do this price competition,
Yeah.
Let me run through anything else we missed, and then it's over to you for anything that I missed. Much rather charge at Pilot Flying J than Walmart. That makes sense, although those Walmart camping trips that we've done, we've been able to stock up before we go. So I do like that sometimes. Yeah. How do we get charging networks to be more transparent? It's a good one to chew on, maybe.
Yeah.
I think we had touched on it a little bit.
Yeah,
they're going to start to be torpedoed if they don't. There's going to have to be a certain amount of, this is how long something's going to take. I don't think we're ever going to get, it's still, some of these are still, automakers behind them, and we don't get a whole lot of transparency from some of them. But, I think it's going to have to be coming. Otherwise, people are going to do exactly what we've been talking about and just go to a different provider.
Yeah.
Brian says, saw the PBS bit you mentioned. It was frustrating. Turn off comments on all videos. May not be nefarious. Yeah, I've seen some people who are they don't have the resources to moderate that stuff.
Yeah.
It's not always. Okay, I think any installs by EVgo Pilot yet? Have you seen anything out there?
There have been a couple, not in my area. At least I've checked the pilots in my area. They're still not there. And maybe I need to issue a point of correction, Steve. I don't actually live in California. I live in the state of Jefferson, and we have slightly different infrastructure up here. So
I don't know. Yeah. I think people just assume you live in an apartment in San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have my long flowing surfer locks, but there are a couple in Georgia that I know about that have already gone in. I don't think that they've been powered on yet, and there are a couple that are going in, I think in Ohio, Michigan area. So they are starting to go in, maybe even Pennsylvania, maybe something that's kind of within your reach, Steve. But Yeah, I haven't seen any of them fully go live yet. So,
okay. Well, we're bumping up against the hour in 5 minutes. So, anything that I may have interrupted you at or missed,
well, I
floor
mean,
is yours.
I was going to say we could close out a little bit with the plug standard though, because one thing that I did want to kind of voice my concern with is um, because I maybe a comment that started it off is something I've always been concerned with is the superchargers. Is Tesla tends to play fast and loose with the safety certifications, right? So you see like the V3 superchargers, the UL placard on them says like 630 amps, but then you do the math and you say, oh, they're charging at what now? 250, 260 kilowatt. Those numbers don't jive, right? So it means that they're pushing way past their rated amperage for as per the UL listing. Now you can get away with that, especially with a liquid cooled cable, up to a certain point. In fact, well, I won't bring the props out. I have a CCS cable next to me where it's rated for up to 400 amps, but only for a short period of time, and then it derates to 250 amps. Same thing with these charging cables, and Tesla can really get away with this with their standard because most of their cars are not charging to at 250 kilowatt for more than a few minutes, right? You see a pretty rapid ramp down in charging rate. And I think that could be why we saw those Magic Dock cables derated to 350 amps, because when you start to add a CCS component to it, now you're opening up the door for a GMC Hummer EV to roll in and pull 500 amps flat literally for 30 minutes or more. So those Huber plus Sooner cables, we don't like them because they're big and they're heavy and they're bulky and they have bad thermistors and all of those other issues with them. But they are rated for 500 amp current consistently. So if a Hummer EV pulls into an EV Go station, plugs in Huber plus Sooner cable on a Delta 350 kilowatt, they can pull that 500 amps for 20 to 30 minutes, no problem. We don't know if the V3 superchargers can do that. We don't know if that NACS plug or the Tesla plug can handle sustained currents for that long. And this is something I don't see anyone else talking about is, are we creating a power gap? Because essentially, I don't believe for a second that the NACS cable, the Tesla cable, even at 1,000 volts, can maintain 1 megawatt for more than a minute or two. Like you're really pushing way past what that cable is rated for. And a CCS1 cable upgraded, maybe with the Tesla V3 sub-ambient liquid cooling, could potentially pull off 1 megawatt for a period of time. But we're creating this gap between the cutoff for these medium to light duty personal vehicles and where Charin's MCS, the megawatt charging standard, would take over. And there's about a 500 kilowatt charging speed gap between where I see something like this Tesla plug capping out if it's subjected to the same IEC and ISO safety certifications and standards that these other charging plugs are subjected to. So we could potentially see derated charging speeds. So it's not going to affect you, Steve, right? In the something like the Hyundai Ioniq 5, one of the claims to fame, I knew when I was driving the Kia EV6, one of the great things is if I got stuck on a 150 kilowatt charger, 350 amp max, it didn't matter. I was still pulling 170 kilowatts because of that charging voltage and everything else. But when you're talking about these bigger battery Ford Lightnings, the Rivians, all the BMWs, right? The GMC Hummer EV, Silverado EV, these are all vehicles that are going to be severely impacted if they can't pull 500 or more amps, even at 1,000 volts for a long period of time. And so I worry that we might be opening ourselves up in the future for sort of power gap between where Charin and the MCS takes over and where this new plug format with sort of industry accepted safety ratings is cut off. And so, I mean, Tesla might be willing to push past that on their V4 superchargers, but that's Tesla. right? And I mean, and still, if I'm right, and 5 minutes into your charge on a V4 supercharger, your Cybertruck or your Hummer EV has to derate down to 200 kilowatt or 300 kilowatt. Is that really where we want to be? So we have to keep that in mind as well, because you're talking about a plug. I mean, I mentioned I brought props, right? So this is that same Tesla plug head. You compare it to an Avcon. Oh wait, no, that's a 20-year-old plug. You compare it to the CCS plug head, right? So these DC pins, and just look at the cabling that's coming out of the back of that. Now imagine the cabling coming out of the back of this plug head. And these aren't even 500 amp cables, right? So we're going to run into, I think, some potential for power limitations at these chargers moving forward, and I'd like to see how that's going to be addressed. I mean, liquid cooling is one issue, but we talked about reliability. One of the main issues with reliability with Electrify America and the derated chargers was the thermistors, right? They had faulty thermistors, and when a thermistor goes out, the charger has to default to a lower rate because it has to assume that the liquid cooling no longer is working. How is that going to work with NACS or with whatever SAE decides to call this new format? So these are concerns moving forward. So it's not like the sky is falling. Like I said, I want to be very clear that I think this is a net positive for the community. I think that Tesla plug on 500 volt EVs is good for any EV up to a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack. And I think that on 800 to 1000 volt, it's good for any EV up to about 200 to 250 kilowatt hour battery pack. After that, though, and we will see EVs with bigger battery packs, I worry that we're going to be running into commercial vehicles, industrial vehicles, heavy-duty personal vehicles. We might have a gap in our charging standard.
So, and they had the SAE were looking at doing that, fast tracking it right by the end of the year. So, I mean, it needs to be ready, I would guess, before the vehicles, or at least with the adapters, maybe not, but certainly when they're native.
I mean, technically, it's already ready, right? I mean, Tesla has already been using the J1772 standard for AC. And so as far as that plug is concerned, it's already ready for AC charging. The only issue is on the automakers to insert a relay and a switch inside the car that switches between AC and DC. And then the CCS protocols, the ISO 115, what was it? 15.8, whatever. I'm going to run out of the numbers, but all of the DIN and ISO protocols are already integrated into the Tesla superchargers. They already support auto charge. They already support all of these other features. So I feel like the SAE homologation of the standard is super important, especially from a safety perspective. But I feel like it's mostly academic at this point. Like I feel like everything is already in place. And the only reason we're not able to use the superchargers right now with the basic CCS adapter is because Tesla doesn't want us to. And the only reason, and maybe this is an important point this is probably the most important point, actually, Steve. So sorry, I know we want
to make sure we cover it all.
Tesla owners who do not have the power line communication module installed in their cars will not be able to use public chargers with that NACS cable until they get that power line communication module installed. So essentially, if you cannot use the CCS1 adapter in your Tesla right now, you will not be able to use an NACS. And this is why I said I'm kind of concerned about the naming convention and how it's being presented as being confusing, because I don't think a lot of Tesla owners realize that. If they roll up to an EVgo charging station, if they couldn't use that EVgo charging station with a CCS adapter, they're not going to be able to use an NACS. And yes, EVgo does still have their 50 kilowatt CHAdeMO adapters. That's technically the Tesla standard, which is not the NACS standard. right? So that's the old CAN bus standard converted from CHAdeMO. You could use that, but you're not going to be able to use a 350 kilowatt CCS EVgo charger with a new Tesla plug on it until you get that power line communication module installed into your car. And from what I've heard from Tesla owners, that's kind of slow going, and not a lot of people have that yet. So that's a big factor that I think has been missing from this discussion, because I guess everybody just assumes that people will only ever want to use the superchargers moving forward. So, and I think that's a mistaken assumption. So.
Yeah, well, especially, some of the, as you get more into more different charging propositions with like the Rivian kind of network going to, places that hopefully others won't because they want to hit those more kind of remote locations, you're going to want those charging networks to, have access to them all because, if that's the only option or it's the best option in that place, then that will still be better than a supercharger that's 100 miles down the road.
So it's interesting. I was going to call out a comment though too, that Leonard is saying that in Europe the V2 superchargers are also capable of talking to CCS. So,
the only success I've seen Ioniq 5 owners in Europe report is on V2 superchargers. That would be the backward part of it, comparing it to the US. But I haven't dived into it enough to know who was doing it and what they had, but certainly it seems like that's a different piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's not. I guess the moral of the story, Steve, is there's still a lot up in the air, but I just don't feel like this. I don't feel like there are news agencies that are covering this as accurately as they could, knowing what they know, and then there are, I think, a lot of news agencies that are covering this that literally don't know enough to be commenting on it, but I think they want to be commenting on it because they know how important of an issue it is, or how clickbaity of an issue it is, maybe. So I'm a little bit concerned that there's a lot of information being omitted from the discussion. So, and I think your experience in the i5 is super important, right? Like, and anybody who's planning to use the superchargers really needs to look at that Magic Dock experience. So,
are you telling me I have to stop at more Magic Docks tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, I only have 2 in California.
Well, I'm adopting a Pokemon kind of mentality to it. We have 9. I'm going to try and collect them all. So we'll see how we go. All right, we have imposed on people's time enough, or I've certainly taken more of your time than I should. But I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being willing to come on and share the the viewpoints that we don't necessarily get. I'm more than happy to do this on a more recurring basis. We'll but thank you everybody for joining us. Appreciate it. It was kind of short notice, so if we do another one, you will certainly be forewarned.
Thank you, Steve, and of course keep up the good work. Like I said, I think it's important to make sure we're getting viewpoints from around the country. So
yeah, for sure. So yeah, people, please go in the description. You'll find a link, and I'll put a comment as well on the end video here to go to Eric's channel. Please subscribe. I'll get him above the 666 that currently sits there on an ominous tone. So get him to 667 at least. That's in the thousands, not me. It's just the way YouTube abbreviates. Please go and subscribe to Brian Ribby Drives Electric. This gives you a nice kind of, you have California, even though it's Jefferson State or whatever you were trying to. Yeah. I'm sure the local politics that I don't understand. You'll have the West Coast covered with Eric. You'll have the Midwest and Central cold states covered with Brian Ribby Drives Electric, and I'll try and cover my Northeast as best I can. So thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you when we see you.
Thank you, everyone. All right, thanks.